I'm Julie Legg, author of The Missing Piece and diagnosed with ADHD at 52.
And I'm Gel Legg, diagnosed at 55.
Welcome to ADH Difference. In today's episode, we'll be talking about friendships, and not of the romantic relationship kind, but just good old genuine friendships. With ADHD being ever present in our lives, we can reflect back on our friendships as a child, really, can't we?
Absolutely.
The old school years.
Yes, as we have this word friendship, and we often try to define what friendship means. And I don't think we perhaps understand the word the same way as many other people do. I often read stories of people who are dear friends, been friends for decades, and how their relationship works within that framework. But we don't really think we have friendships. We think we have great acquaintances. By definition of other people's descriptions of friendships, we just don't seem to have them, apart from each other. But each other's a primary relationship, which is not what this is about. But we are each other's best friends.
I think it's almost a learned thing, this word friendship, because starting out, as a youngster, say even at primary school, I had friend groups, and I didn't really feel that I fitted into those friend groups, but I was always able to be social. So for me, they were my friends. At the time, I didn't know them as any other word. Now I can look back at them and say, oh, actually, they were just peer groups, to be to be honest.
Yeah, because as parents, and our parents before us to say, have you made friends at school? Yes, I've got lots of friends, and you can name 4 or 5 people. But as, for a young child, the word friend is much easier to understand and pronounce than acquaintance.
Definitely.
But as adults now, we do owe it to ourselves to define what a friend is. And that does help when you are in a society where we're expected to have friendships, and we're told it's easy to make them when you're young, great to make them at university when you meet heaps of people, then through your career, and then they dwindle out and it gets harder to make friendships as you get older. And so we have this constant conversations about how older people are lonely, and loneliness can be a killer, literally, they reckon, some people think. And so we're left with this deficit, this thing, with the idea we don't have friends, and so it's going to be bad for our health. However, we strongly believe acquaintances can bring as much joy into our world as having a traditional friend. Absolutely.
Can we go back to the school years, though?
Yes.
Because I think that's when we're beginning to be social. Having a friend is important, or it is. We want to fit in. I found at around 8 or 9, as I said before, I was very social, but I'd find maybe over talking and over sharing, I might be shunned from one group. So I'd wander into another, and there I'd be quieter, but then almost feel I was a bit picked on because I didn't really have my say, because I was too concerned about over talking or over sharing. So it can get a bit confusing, and girls particularly can be quite manipulative, and I struggled with friendships at a school age.
I always had friends, well, we'll call it for the sake of this chat, I always had friends at school. Looking back with the hindsight of a late adult ADHD diagnosis, I always had a best friend, always. Even through adult life, I always had a best friend. There were lots of other people around, but there was that one person that I would go and play with the most, or phone up, or plan adventures with. And then there would be secondary ones below that if they weren't available. When it comes to sort of adulthood, yes, that's carried on. However, although this isn't about relationships, I've only had a year or 2 of my life not being in a romantic relationship, which were great years. I mean, I love being on my own, but my partner's always been my best friend, and it's always struck me to have a friendship as valuable or strong outside of that would always be a bit of a conflict. So this pattern of always having a best friend endured into adulthood by having a partner. A romantic partner, whatever you want to call it. But as a child, yeah, lots of friends. However, I'm blessed with having all my school reports right through to the age of 15, 16. And it appears when I look back through them that I probably wasn't a really good friend to other kids. One of the criticisms that often is in there is I wouldn't share the classroom activities or toys. I was quite independent. Bolshy, arrogant, self-assured, all sorts of words like that. I think the teacher would have rather written in the report when I can reflect on myself. So this idea of having friends is just as important in reverse is what kind of friends are we to other people with ADHD?
Yeah, it is interesting. I would think that a friend is someone that you can rely on. And I think this is maybe where my expectations grew throughout this childhood into school, into sort of workplace and young adulthood through marriage and beyond. My expectations were quite high, who I'd be friends with and what that meant. And I think there were disappointments along the way. And so I learnt not to actually rely on other people a lot, which is a bit sad in a way, because you should be able to share the burden of life or just share great moments. But I was a bit disappointed. One, for example, I had a really, really good schoolmate at high school. So I would have been about 14, and we were inseparable for about 18 months, and she was my best friend. And we were so joined at the hip. We thought it would be really funny to shock our peers by not being friends. So we thought, yeah, let's do it. So one lunchtime, we parted ways. Everyone was shocked and horrified. Yay, job done. But after a month, we actually didn't rejoin, and we went our separate ways and have never spoken since, which is really bizarre. And I thought it was really awkward because I didn't, we should have been friends again, but that just didn't happen. She wandered into another group and was quite happy there. And I kind of, bumbled my way through the rest of high school and then left. So it was really odd, very odd.
This pattern you mentioned, yeah, so we have high expectations of friends. I think that's been a lifetime thing that's gone on, because always having a singular primary friend at each stage of life, to me now I look back, is no different to having a relationship. Your partner in a romantic relationship should be your best friend. And so that pattern's always been there. And so there are high expectations. And so when it becomes to a social friend group, I have the same expectations on the individuals that would qualify for me calling them a friend as I would for a partner. That expectations, that they're really high. Whereas with acquaintances, once you learn not to have those expectations, which aren't really fair, you certainly learn over the years that you can get a lot more from acquaintances, a lot more joy.
And also they don't disappoint you because those expectations aren't there.
Yeah.
So perhaps we're putting so much emphasis on what a friend should be that that we're kind of missing the mark a little. But there'll be lots of people that think of us as great friends. We're there at the end of the phone whenever they want to call, and we're helpful and all of those good things, but it kind of doesn't work the other way around.
That is not to take, if any of you guys are listening, that's not to say we're not friends by your definition. Of course we are, but by ours, we struggle the word friends. We can love these people in our lives. They can be in our lives for decades, and they can be very important to us, but we're not in each other's pockets. We may not see each other more than 2 or 3 times a year. We may not know exactly what's going on a daily basis. We don't continually communicate through emails or social media or text. So we live separate lives, we catch up, and then we've got lots of stories to tell. From an ADHD viewpoint, that really suits us because they will always bring fascinating and fantastic stories to the table. And we love that time we have with them. But I think a nightmare we would both describe is the kind of friend that pops in once a week or a couple of times a week, and it just sits there for 2 or 3 hours clogging up the house with no new stories. I've witnessed...
And complaining.
And complaining and moaning about their lives and bringing negativity. Because let's face it, if you were to sit down for 3 hours every week with someone, it's... What are you bringing to the table that's new and interesting? Very rarely anything.
So that's the interesting thing I think about work colleagues too. For me, when you spend so much time with work colleagues, and you have the same repetitive conversations on a daily basis, and what are you up to on the weekend? I run out of oomph, I think, because I can predict what they're going to be doing, and there's no fun stories, and I'm going to use the word boring, which sounds terrible, but if you have ADHD, you might get my drift with regards to that disinterest. It starts getting a little bit repetitive.
But can I just say on the work colleague thing, we've both had lots and lots of friends over the decades through work, and as an adult, work environments are the classic environment in order to make a friend. Looking back, I'm not sure as an ADHD whether it was particularly healthy, because you tend to, even if that's the person you get on great with at work, you then go out and do social things with. And sometimes I've flattered with people I've worked with. So you really are spending time with them. You end up in this circular conversations, and it's always going to be about work. It's always, and it's about something generally you can't change. It's not in your power. Whereas a relationship, such as our relationship and romantic ones and so on, outside of those fixed things, we have the ability to make choices and have more power over our lives. So those friendships are more empowered to have deeper meanings. For an ADHD person, that means a great deal to me. The idea of going around in continuous loops of debate and argument over something which can't be changed is one of my sort of nightmares. I want you to talk about object permanence, because that relates very much to work colleague friendships, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I moved locations a lot. This is undiagnosed ADHD. It would be nothing to move cities on a whim. I fell into contracting, which I've spoken about before, short bursts of work and interesting people, and then I would leave because of the end of the contract. And so I got to meet lots and lots of people, and for a short period of time they were interesting and wonderful people. But when I left each job and started the next, I found this pattern that none of my old friends, if you want to refer to them as that, they never came with me. They never stayed in touch, and I never stayed in touch with them either. And I think it's quite common for ADHDers with this thing called object permanence. If people and things aren't in front of you, you're likely to forget them, and not in a harsh manner, but just because they're not in your present. And so if you don't see them every day, then you might forget to call them, because you know what I mean, it's not within your vision. And so a lot of those pockets of potential friend groups fell away really easily for me. And that's really been the story of my life. Lots of locations. I'm a very, very social person. I dive in there. It's wonderful. But those friends never have really stayed with me.
And even taking that to the next step, I've split my adult life since my early 20s, pretty much 60% New Zealand, 40% UK. So that means I've upped and left one country and gone and lived in the other for, say, 8, 9, 10 years. And then luckily I'm fully settled back here now, and I've been, and what that means is at a point you leave a country, you may know 15 or 20 people. You may, and you have to say goodbye to them all, and you just go, boom, gone. And then you arrive, and if you've not, say I'd been back in the UK for 10 years, all the people I knew in New Zealand for all the years before I went to the UK, I no longer know them. They've disappeared. They're not part of my world anymore. And then I look around now at the people I know in my life, and I'm so blessed to have these wonderful acquaintances. And, if I were to leave back to the UK tomorrow, then they will all disappear again. So I think that's something I feel, having ADHD, I've always found quite easy to do, because I love to meet new people and keep it fresh. Now, the people I went to school and college with and had my primary social life involved around music and being in bands right into my early 20s, 23 or so, I pretty much know for a fact they still are very close to each other 35 years later and still have regular socials and are in each other's world. This is quite a strong thing that goes on in England. It's part of the culture there that if you largely stay around a similar town you grow up to, you're likely to have very long-term embedded friendships. And I say, good, great, fantastic, awesome. But for me, looking back and looking forward, I can't imagine anything worse. There's a lovely nostalgic aspect to that. And I did once catch up with these friends, having not seen them for a long time. But, one evening was enough. It didn't. And there's a fantastic bunch of people. I've got such happy memories of the time I spent with them. But, yeah, I just can't imagine repeating that cycle all the time with the same people. Even now, we're excited about moving to the other end of New Zealand, where we know no one, and starting again. That's something that never goes. And I think ADHD is part of the reasons for that. Maybe in some ways it's an enabler because we're always seeking dopamine hits of new, interesting, exciting situations and new people. And with ADHD, whatever we reminisce and talk about in our childhood, it's the same now. It doesn't go. It's just our age and maturity deals with it differently.
Yeah, definitely. In The Missing Piece, a lot of women had contributed that they too had issues fitting in around school and teens and young adulthood, and also those midlife also say it's an issue for them now. So it isn't just us. It can be quite a challenge for many women. In fact, I just got an email the other day from someone who had been referred to the book and had read it and thanked me just for that section on friendships really resonated with her. It was that aha moment that, it all makes sense now. And this is, post-diagnosis, we're able to go back and analyse, of course, all these sort of chunks of our previous decades. Whereas at the time, you're just living it. You move on and you survive and you do the next thing. And it's only when you stop and pause and reflect, then you can actually see this pattern. So, yeah, it's quite interesting.
And on that note, a wee story that I think reflects that well is, so how people look at you, if you have ADHD, and how you see them in that framework of that group of friends may not always be through the same lens. What I mean is, for instance, I was in a band in college, so we're talking 17. They were the centre of my social world, centre of my drive and interest in things. I mean, I wasn't studying my A-levels. I was rubbish at them. I just was fascinated by wanting to learn to play music and be in a band. That was where I saw a future. I just assumed everyone in the band with me was the same, but I don't think they were. They were doing it for social reasons, just for a laugh and for smoking and drinking and just for a giggle, just as what they did. Whereas I was a little more serious about it. Anyway, I remember being mortified one lunchtime at college when a couple of the members of the band, who I'd known for a long time, just pulled me aside and said, "You're no longer in the band." And they were really nice about it, and there was no big hoo-ha and argument. And I don't think that acquaintanceship, friendship thingy with them necessarily went down the gurgler because of that. But I was mortified. My world came to an end. It was like, and because they're one of the best bands in college, and I didn't really want to go elsewhere, so I did have to go elsewhere, and I made a couple of other acquaintances. The irony was, 2 years or so after that, we got back together as if that never happened, and we were in a band, and we were in that band for many years and did lots of cool things. But along the way of being in that band, sorry, it's a bit of a longer story than I intended, there was a moment one night in the pub when we all sat there after a rehearsal, and we're now 5 years older, and we sat in the pub, and I turned to everyone and said, wow, I think, we've got a great set of songs, we're doing great gigs, we're well rehearsed, we should record a single and look at see if we can put a single out. And then one of the guys in the band just said, no, I'm not doing a single. Why not? It's obvious we should do that. No, because I'm doing this for fun. I'm not doing this to become a musician. I've got to have another career I've studied for, and it was a very boring career. And I thought, oh my word, at this exact moment, I'm not in this band for the reason you guys are in this band. And so for all the fun and shared camaraderie and a thing we call close friendship, it was not. So my ADHD was being driven to have a different relationship to not only the people and the reason we were together as them, that I just couldn't see that coming. And so, boom, I emigrated at that point and then found a couple of people who really wanted to do something with music, and one sitting next to me now. And it never transpired into a successful career in music. However, the irony now is that we are still doing music very seriously and professionally, and I really passionately. It doesn't mean we're looking for great success from it. That's not the point. The point is, I think I'm probably the only one left in that large circle of musicians 35 years later, still passionately spending a lot of time doing music. I think they might occasionally play, but I'm still very serious about what I do and very passionate. And so I have to take ownership of that. So the point I'm trying to say to you is that when you look back on your relationships, once you know you have ADHD, I look back on all those situations and think my ADHD must have been driving me back then in a way that they couldn't understand, I couldn't understand, but it did make me I was known as the devil's advocate. I was the one that was, it's gel, yeah, it's a jellyism. It's like... And I just thought that was a bit unkind. It's like, well, what's wrong with me? I think I'm an ordinary guy, but I wasn't ordinary compared to them. I simply wasn't.
No, you're not ordinary, Jel. So for those people, I think, who are feeling lonely and feeling that a friendship actually is something that they really want to do, to find a group of people, don't give up on it. You know what the challenges are going to be, and it might be overthinking about your relationship with them or your friendship with them, or might be over talking or over sharing. You can practice active listening, and I don't know, even meeting up with in a group with folk that have a common interest. That's a really good start, at least. I mean, if you're really into hiking, at least you'll have a group of people that you can chat with along your walks, or whether it's a theatre group or whatever it may be. So, starting off slowly. I know for us, just like relationships with friendships, we tend to throw ourselves into it, and probably scare them off, inviting them over for dinner the next day, and maybe just taking smaller steps if you're really seriously about looking to gain a friendship, and looking at it that way. But also just adjust your expectations too, that it might not be as mutual as you would like it to be, and for all sorts of reasons they might not have time to see you, or they might not be passing your way as often as you'd like them to, and so just have a little bit of perspective there. I do think,
based on what you're just saying there, I do think finding something, those hobbies, those interests you have, particularly outside of work, that are perhaps energy driven and suit your ADHD, and hopefully involve other people, as Jules mentioned, other things like climbing, football, rugby, sport, all sorts of things, tramping, doesn't really matter, find something. I would say that's not just a start for friends, it's a start, middle and end, because all the time you have that shared interest, say cycling may last 10 years and then you get bored of it, fine, but in those 10 years you should make some great acquaintances. You will always find some people you can get on with if you have a shared passion. If you have no shared interests, well, I think that's getting a bit more interesting, it's a bit more challenging. But it's then when you're in those spaces, is what you expect from those people and how you define yourself in relation to this thing called friendship, and to try to avoid the disappointment of expecting more than you're getting back, but appreciate what you are getting and enjoying it for what it is. And I honestly believe that really good acquaintances can bring so much energy and dopamine to the ADHD. For example, we go away for weekends occasionally, and when we go away, we have no real plans. We just head to somewhere. We can find ourselves sat in a pub. I remember one night in Queenstown this happened. We sat in a pub and we casually started talking to a couple of Australian tourists, sort of similar, well, slightly older, one younger than us, similar generations to them. And 5 hours later, we were like the best of pals, rolling around, sharing stories, opening our hearts, having such a blast. And we will always remember that night.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean we've stayed in touch to some degree, but it doesn't mean that it's so sad we lost it. You can be very sad that you don't have friends like that in your life to do that every weekend with, or you can say, wow, how blessed I was just by not being tied into regular friend groups, barbecues every weekend. You've got to break out of that and just meet the most amazing people.
And also too, maybe it's a little bit, I don't know what's the right term. I'll say spreading the load with regards to, maybe you get that lovely social connection at this group that you meet once a month. Maybe you can also get it walking with your neighbour every Saturday. You don't have to get all the feels from one friend. You can take the wins off a number of really good acquaintances and don't feel that you're missing out.
Yes, if you redefine this definition of the word friend and have a good think about it, you can have a huge amount of social human contact that satisfies your need to talk and laugh and enjoy people, but take all the pressure off the word friend and even just wander around a market on a Saturday and say hello to some of the store owners and say, wow, what amazing, what's this here? And you don't have to spend loads of money or any money, but you can engage. It's that human contact. We do it in the supermarkets. We generally end up having a conversation with someone standing in the queue. Always bring a smile and a good morning to the person serving you. You may end up walking out having just had a fantastic 10-minute conversation while you're packing your groceries.
I also think
dopamine. That's dopamine, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it just will bounce out, going, yay, human interaction.
The other thing that I think could be useful is to be kind on yourself. Because, I remember in certain friendship groups, I'd be the life of the party. I'd be the one dancing on the tables or, rounding them up and revving them up to go and have some fun. And they would look to me as that I was that friend. And then there are other groups that I'm really quite quiet and I'm not so boisterous. And they might think of me as quite a quiet mouse kind of character. And I am neither the party animal nor the quiet mouse. I am me. And it doesn't matter what they think of me as long as I feel part of the tribe, even for an hour,
Actually, that description, being in the party and revving people up, and I think you used to have a wee trick. We didn't know anyone. You'd walk around grab a plate of food and just walk around with it. So you get to meet everyone at the party.
Yeah. I didn't want to be stuck with anybody, so I used to volunteer. I'd go into the kitchen and get trays and trays of food, and I'd just spend all night walking around feeding people.
So you meet everyone. Yeah, I mean...
And then by the end of it, there'll be someone that, you found out the ones that are a little bit more chatty or interesting.
So being the life and soul of the party, I think that's something a lot of ADHDers probably have been described of at some point. Once we've got our motors running and we're in that situation, we're going to have fun. We're going to rock out. But of course the party is a thing and then the next day it's over. So we cannot realistically expect that party to then result in that continuing the next day. We can be up with the dopamine getting absolutely filled up. The next day it's depleted, bam, down again. So, we don't, being the life and soul of the party in other people's eyes, maybe we're not the life and soul, we're the entertainment at the party.
Yes.
And we can be the entertainment, but we have to own that. We have to learn. I think getting back to this whole thing with acquaintances and friendships, once you know you have ADHD, or even if you suspect you have it, it's about trying to see how other people see you. it's not always about, we look at the world a certain way. We have a different way of looking at things, and our brains need different ways of functioning. But in terms of, that doesn't matter in a lot of things. When it comes to other humans, you do have to look at them and say, well, they don't function like us. They don't need the same things as us. They want different things out of friendships. So our best success of interacting with other people is try to understand them. We want them to understand us because we're meant to be the minority, but we do have a sort of duty of care on ourselves to try to understand how the majority think.
Yeah,
I think that's quite an interesting way of
It
putting
is,
it.
it is.
And in doing that, we are doing not them a favour. We're not looking after them. We're doing ourselves a favour by then limiting or managing, not limiting, but let's say managing our expectations and what we're going to get out of a social interaction. Do that, and I guarantee you'll have more success with it and less disappointment and failure, I think.
well done.
Wow. Gold star.
Absolutely. So that's friendships. We do things differently with ADHD, and if you look back in your past, you'll absolutely. The odds are that you'll see these little patterns emerging, and you may still be in that pattern now. If just a rejiggle of expectations, maybe how you define the word friend. We're quite strict on calling it close acquaintances, but that's just a thing between us because we get it. But ride with it. Have a look at your expectations. Be kind on yourself, and as Giles said, just. Active listening and just being reflective that they are humans too, and they have other needs.
It's a more holistic, sort of bigger picture view of how you see yourself fitting in with what is the majority of people that don't think like you. And it's not just analysing the past. That's where all the knowledge and the experience comes to the table. Then it's today, the present, and then the important part is the future going forward. Then hopefully you get empowered to understand yourself in relation to other people more. As I say, understanding yourself is more important than expecting everyone else to understand you. We write with the book and these chats, we're hoping people who are partners of people with ADHD could listen to some of this and get an insight that we can explain that perhaps a partner can't explain. It's one of the big points of the book, isn't it? It's not just for people with ADHD, it's for those around them. However, at the end of the day, we do have to take responsibility for our relationship. So I'm repeating myself, that's a good ADHD thing, but I'll leave that one there.
Well, in fact, I think we'll leave this episode there. So thanks for listening.